Ethan Blake thought he was doing the right thing when he pulled over on Highway 27 that morning. The black Mercedes sat there with its hood open, smoke curling into the October air like a warning he didn't know how to read. The woman standing beside it wore a cream suit without a single smudge, her hair perfect despite the supposed breakdown. And when their eyes met, something cold flickered behind her grateful smile. He checked his watch, 30 minutes until the interview that could save his daughter's future, but his hands were already reaching for the toolbox before his mind could catch up. She thanked him in a voice smooth as silk, then said something that made his skin prickle. "You just walked into a character test." He laughed awkwardly, confused, but she just said, "I'm kidding," and swept away his suspicion like dust. 3 days later, a job offer arrived for a position he never applied for, and by then, the engine smoke had stopped looking like an accident. That morning on Highway 27 wasn't a breakdown. Somehow, without knowing it, Ethan had passed a test he never wanted to take. The morning had started like any other desperate morning in the Blake household. Ethan stood in the cramped kitchen of their 2-bedroom apartment, watching Lily pour too much syrup on her waffles, while he rehearsed answers to questions he hoped they would ask. Morrison Industries represented everything they needed: stability, health insurance, enough money to stop choosing between groceries and Lily's school supplies. The stack of overdue bills on the counter seemed to watch him like silent judges, reminding him that this interview was not just an opportunity, but a lifeline. Lily looked up from her breakfast with those dark eyes that reminded him too much of her mother, gone 2 years now, and said something that should have been a warning. "Dad, that lady is still outside." Ethan glanced out the window, but saw only the usual morning traffic, dismissed it as childhood imagination, and returned to adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror. The drive to Morrison Industries took him through the industrial corridor, where old factories gave way to modern corporate campuses. Ethan had mapped the route 3 times, calculated traffic patterns, built in a 15-minute buffer for the unexpected. He was going to be early, composed, ready to convince them that a single father with a high school diploma and 10 years of warehouse management could handle operations coordination for a company that made more in a day than he had earned in his lifetime. The radio played news about corporate scandals and economic uncertainty, background noise to his nervous energy. His phone buzzed with a text from Mike Brennan, his best friend since high school. "Don't blow this, man. Lily's counting on you," as if Ethan needed the reminder. Every choice he made, every risk he took or didn't take, came back to that 10-year-old girl who trusted him to keep their small world from collapsing. That was when he saw the Mercedes, sleek and expensive and wrong for this stretch of highway. The hood was up, white smoke drifting lazily into the cool morning air, and a woman stood beside it with her phone in hand, looking more annoyed than distressed. Ethan's first instinct was to keep driving. He had 28 minutes now, and stopping would cost him the buffer he had built. But his hands turned the wheel almost automatically, pulling onto the shoulder 50 feet ahead of the broken-down car. His father's voice echoed in his memory, a rare piece of wisdom from a man who had otherwise left nothing but absence. "You help people, Ethan. That's what decent people do." He grabbed the small toolbox from his trunk, the one that had seen him through a dozen roadside emergencies, and walked back toward the woman who would change everything. She turned as he approached, and Ethan registered details that did not quite fit the scenario. Her cream-colored suit was immaculate. Not a wrinkle or stain despite kneeling by a smoking engine. Her dark hair was pulled back in a style that looked professionally done that very morning. Her shoes were designer, impractical for standing on a highway shoulder, and spotless. When she smiled, it was the kind of smile that belonged in boardrooms and negotiation tables, calculated and controlled. "Thank you," she said, and her voice carried the smooth confidence of someone accustomed to being heard. I was starting to think no one stopped to help strangers anymore. Ethan set down his toolbox and peered under the hood, trying to identify the source of the smoke while his mind kept tracking the minutes slipping away from his interview time. The engine was hot, but not dangerously so, and the smoke seemed to be coming from coolant leaking onto the manifold. A minor issue, fixable with time, but time was exactly what Ethan did not have. "Looks like a hose came loose," he said, straightening up. "I can tighten it, but it'll take maybe 15-20 minutes. The woman, Victoria, she introduced herself without offering a last name, nodded slowly, studying him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "You were going somewhere important," she observed, gesturing at his suit and tie. It was not a question. Ethan found himself explaining about the interview, about Morrison Industries, about how this opportunity could change things for his daughter. Victoria listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable, and when he finished, she said something that made the hair on his neck stand up. "You just walked into a character test." She laughed immediately, a light dismissive sound. "I'm kidding. That was terrible timing for a joke. Please, take your time with the car. I'll call a mechanic, and you should get to your interview." But Ethan was already committed, already kneeling by the engine with his tools spread on the pavement. Something in him could not leave a job half-finished, could not drive away from someone who needed help, even if that someone was a stranger in designer clothes who made jokes that landed like threats. He worked quickly, aware of Victoria standing a few feet away, her phone in her hand, but never actually making a call. She asked questions, casual questions about his life, his daughter, his work history, and Ethan answered, because the silence felt more uncomfortable than the conversation. 20 minutes became 30, and when Ethan finally closed the hood and wiped his hands on a rag, he knew with sick certainty that he had missed the window. Morrison Industries was 40 minutes away, and his interview had started 10 minutes ago. Victoria thanked him with that same calculated smile, pressed a business card into his hand that he barely glanced at, and drove away in her Mercedes that purred like it had never had a problem in its life. Ethan sat in his car for 5 minutes, staring at his phone, before calling Morrison Industries to apologize for being late. The receptionist was cold, professional, final. "Mr. Harrison has already left. The position has been filled. Thank you for your interest." The drive home felt longer than it should have, every mile a reminder of the choice he had made and what it had cost. Lily was at school, which meant Ethan had hours to sit in their apartment and calculate how many weeks they had before the rent became impossible, before the utilities got shut off, before he had to have conversations with his daughter about things she should never have to worry about. He looked at the business card Victoria had given him. Simple, expensive cardstock with just a name and a phone number, no company affiliation. Victoria Sterling. The name meant nothing to him then. Mike called around noon, heard the defeat in Ethan's voice, and said all the right things about other opportunities and not giving up, but they both knew that jobs like the one at Morrison Industries did not come along often for someone with Ethan's resume. That night, when Lily asked why he looked so sad, Ethan told her he had helped someone whose car broke down. "Then it's okay, Dad," she said with the absolute certainty of childhood. "Helping people is never wrong." Ethan wanted to believe her, wanted to think that doing the right thing mattered even when it cost him everything. But the bills on the counter told a different story. The email arrived 2 days later, impersonal and impossible. "Dear Mr. Blake, we would like to invite you for an interview at Morrison Industries. Please report to our offices tomorrow at 9 a.m. to meet with David Foster, Vice President of Operations. We apologize for any confusion regarding previous communication. Ethan read it 3 times, convinced it was spam or a mistake or some kind of cruel joke. He called the number in the email signature and got a professional receptionist who confirmed the appointment and asked if he had any dietary restrictions for the office lunch they would provide. When he arrived at Morrison Industries the next morning, 15 minutes early, paranoid about being late again, the atmosphere was completely different from what he expected. The receptionist, who had been cold during his first call, now smiled warmly and directed him to a conference room on the executive floor. David Foster was in his mid-40s, with the kind of easy confidence that came from years of making decisions that affected hundreds of lives. He spent the first 10 minutes of the interview asking about Ethan's background, his approach to problem-solving, his experience managing difficult situations. Then the questions shifted, became oddly personal and specific. "Tell me about a time you sacrificed something important to help a stranger," Foster said, leaning back in his leather chair. Ethan hesitated, uncertain where this was going, then described the incident on Highway 27. Foster listened without expression, made a note on his tablet, and asked a follow-up that made Ethan's stomach tighten. "And you didn't know who she was at the time?" The phrasing was strange, the implication clear. Foster knew about Victoria, knew about that morning, knew things that should have been private and random. "No," Ethan said carefully. "She gave me her card, but I didn't recognize the name." Foster nodded slowly, and something that might have been approval crossed his face. "Ms. Sterling speaks very highly of your character," he said. "She suggested you would be an excellent fit for our operations team." The room seemed to tilt slightly. Victoria Sterling was not just a random woman with car trouble. She was connected to Morrison Industries, had influence over hiring decisions, had engineered a situation where Ethan would reveal something about himself without knowing he was being evaluated. The job offer came at the end of the interview. Immediate, generous, almost too good to be true. The salary was double what Ethan had dared to hope for. The benefits package included health insurance, a retirement plan, and a clause that made his breath catch: full tuition coverage at any private school in the district for dependent children. "We take care of our people here," Foster said, sliding the contract across the table. "Ms. Sterling believes in investing in integrity, and she has specifically requested that you join our team." Ethan should have asked more questions, should have wondered why a woman he had helped for 30 minutes on a highway would go to such lengths to get him hired. But the numbers on the contract were hypnotic, and all he could think about was Lily getting the education she deserved, about paying bills without panic, about finally having some cushion between his family and disaster. He signed the contract, shook Foster's hand, and drove home feeling like he had won some kind of lottery he had not known he was playing. That night, he took Lily out for pizza, a small celebration they could not really afford, but needed anyway, and told her that things were going to get better. She hugged him tight and said she was proud of him, and Ethan let himself believe that helping a stranger had led to something good instead of something he did not yet understand. The first week at Morrison Industries passed in a blur of training sessions, system orientations, and introductions to colleagues who regarded him with polite suspicion. Ethan was used to being the new person, the outsider who had to prove his worth. But there was something else in the way people looked at him. Curiosity mixed with caution, as if they knew something about his hiring that he did not. His direct supervisor was a woman in her early 30s named Sarah Martinez, sharp and efficient, with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She walked him through the operations systems, explained the chain of command, and mentioned casually that unexpected hires were not uncommon when Ms. Sterling took an interest in someone. She has good instincts about people, Sarah said, in a tone that suggested layers of meaning Ethan could not quite parse. Just be careful. This place has politics like anywhere else, and being associated with certain names can be complicated. Ethan wanted to ask what she meant, but Sarah had already moved on to explaining inventory tracking protocols. Victoria Sterling materialized in his life like a ghost. Present, but never quite solid. Influential, but always at a distance. Ethan researched her during his lunch break and found a corporate history that made his blood run cold. She was the former CEO of Morrison Industries, had taken the position at 32 and built the company into a regional powerhouse before resigning abruptly 6 months ago amid whispers of scandal and internal investigation. The business press coverage was vague, mentioning board disputes and financial irregularities, but never quite naming specific accusations. In every photo, Victoria had that same calculated smile, the same aura of controlled power. She had left the company, but clearly still had connections, still had influence, still had the ability to get people hired and presumably fired. Ethan tried to convince himself that her interest in him was simple gratitude, that helping her on the highway had earned genuine appreciation. But the more he learned about Victoria Sterling, the less that explanation made sense. Women like her did not do anything simple or genuine. Every action had purpose, every gesture calculated for effect. The message came a week after he started, delivered through a private email address not associated with the company. Ethan, we should talk. There are things you need to understand about Morrison Industries and why I wanted you here. Meet me at Bennett's Cafe tomorrow at 7 p.m. Come alone. Victoria. The phrasing was unsettling, not an invitation but an instruction, carrying implications of secrecy and importance. Ethan showed the email to Mike that evening, and his friend's reaction was immediate and concerned. This is weird, man. Really weird. Why would a former CEO be setting up secret meetings with a new operations coordinator? But Mike did not know what Ethan was starting to suspect, that the job offer, the generous benefits, the unexpected second chance were all part of something larger and more complicated than simple corporate hiring. Ethan went to the cafe because not going felt more dangerous than going, because he needed to understand what role he was playing in whatever game Victoria was running. Bennett's Cafe was upscale and dimly lit, the kind of place where business deals happened over expensive wine and quiet conversations. Victoria sat in a back corner booth, somehow making the casual elegance of her dark blue dress look effortless and deliberate at the same time. She stood when Ethan arrived, shook his hand with a grip that was firmer than expected, and gestured for him to sit across from her. "Thank you for coming," she said, as if he had truly had a choice. "I want to be honest with you about why you're at Morrison Industries." The word honest coming from her mouth felt like a threat disguised as transparency. She explained that the company was corrupt, that members of the board, specifically Thomas Harrison, the VP who had supposedly filled the position during Ethan's first missed interview, had been embezzling funds and manipulating contracts for years. Victoria had discovered the scheme, attempted to expose it, and been forced out instead. They're powerful, connected, and very good at making problems disappear, she said, her voice steady and cold. I need someone on the inside who isn't part of their network, someone they don't see as a threat, someone with integrity who can access information they're trying to hide. Ethan felt the trap closing around him before she finished speaking. You want me to spy for you, he said, and Victoria's expression did not change. I want you to help me prove the truth. Harrison and his associates have stolen millions from this company, from the workers who built it, from the community that depends on it. I was pushed out because I was getting too close. But you're new. You're nobody to them. You can move through the company without triggering suspicion." She slid a folder across the table, and Ethan opened it to find financial documents, emails with redacted names, transfer records that showed money flowing into offshore accounts. "If you help me, I'll make sure you and Lily are taken care of," Victoria said. "If you refuse, I can't guarantee that your position will remain secure. Harrison will eventually figure out I arranged your hiring, and he'll see you as an extension of me. Either way, you're already involved. The only question is whether you're on the side that wins." Ethan stared at the documents, at the evidence of corruption that might be real or might be manufactured, at the woman across from him who had turned a random act of kindness into leverage and obligation. He took the folder home, stayed up until 3 a.m. reading through financial records he barely understood, and realized that Victoria was right about one thing. He was already involved whether he wanted to be or not. The next day at work, Ethan found himself watching his colleagues differently, wondering who was complicit, who was ignorant, who could be trusted. Sarah Martinez caught him studying the organizational chart and said something that made him wonder how much she knew. Looking for the real power structure? It's not what the chart shows. Around here, loyalty matters more than position. She walked away before he could ask what she meant, leaving Ethan with more questions than answers. That evening, Victoria sent another message with a specific request: access to Harrison's email archives, particularly correspondence from 3 years ago regarding a construction contract. "It's in the shared drive. Low-level access required. Just copy the folder to a thumb drive and drop it somewhere I can retrieve it. Simple." Nothing about this was simple, but Ethan found himself logging into the system after hours, navigating to the shared drive, locating the folder Victoria wanted. His hand hovered over the keyboard, and he thought about Lily sleeping safely at home, about the bills that were finally getting paid, about the choice he had made on Highway 27 that had led him to this moment. He copied the files, dropped the thumb drive in the location Victoria specified, and went home feeling like he had crossed a line he could never step back over. The next 2 weeks became a pattern of increasing discomfort. Victoria would request specific documents, access to certain systems, observations about particular employees. Ethan complied because refusing felt impossible, because the implicit threats about his job security were always present, even when unspoken, because some part of him wanted to believe that exposing corruption was the right thing to do. But the work was eating at him, the lying, the sneaking around, the constant fear of being caught. Mike noticed the change, the stress written in Ethan's face and posture. But Ethan could not explain what was happening without admitting he was committing corporate espionage. Lily noticed too in the way children always notice when their parents are carrying weight they cannot share. "Are you okay, Dad?" she asked one morning, and Ethan lied and said he was just tired from learning the new job. She looked at him with those dark eyes that saw too much and said, "You can tell me if something's wrong. I'm not a baby." But she was 10 years old, and Ethan's job was to protect her from exactly this kind of darkness. Then Thomas Harrison entered Ethan's life directly, and the situation became exponentially more complicated. Harrison was in his mid-50s, silver-haired and charismatic, with the kind of easy authority that came from decades of getting what he wanted. He appeared in the operations office one afternoon, introduced himself to Ethan with a firm handshake, and spent 15 minutes asking about his background and how he was settling into the company. The conversation felt casual until the end, when Harrison said something that made Ethan's blood turn cold. "I understand Victoria Sterling recommended you for this position. I'm always interested in the people she takes an interest in. If she reaches out to you for any reason, business advice, company information, anything at all, I'd appreciate it if you'd let me know. We're trying to protect the company from some unfortunate misunderstandings about her departure." The phrasing was careful, the message clear. Harrison knew about Victoria, suspected her agenda, and was warning Ethan that he was being watched. "I'm just here to do my job," Ethan said, and Harrison smiled in a way that suggested he did not believe that for a second. "Of course, but if circumstances change, my door is always open." He left, and Ethan sat at his desk, feeling the walls closing in from both sides. That evening, Victoria called him, the first time she had used his actual phone number instead of email. "Harrison approached you today," she said. Not a question, but a statement. "He's getting nervous, which means we're close to something he doesn't want exposed. I need you to access his computer directly. Install monitoring software that will track his communications." Ethan's hands were shaking. "That's illegal. What you're asking me to do is criminal." Victoria's voice remained calm, reasonable, as if she were explaining simple logic to a child. "What Harrison has done is criminal. What I'm asking you to do is gather evidence. There's a difference." But Ethan was not sure there was a difference, was not sure anymore who was telling the truth and who was using him. "I need time to think about this," he said, and Victoria's silence carried weight. "You don't have much time, Ethan. Harrison is going to figure out what side you're on, and when he does, you need to already be valuable enough to me that I can protect you. Otherwise, you're just collateral damage." She hung up, and Ethan sat in his car in the company parking lot, trying to figure out how helping a stranger had turned into this nightmare where every choice led deeper into danger. Sarah Martinez appeared at his car window, making him jump. She gestured for him to roll it down, and when he did, she spoke quickly and quietly. "We need to talk. Not here, not at work. There's a diner on 5th Street. Meet me there in an hour." She walked away before he could respond, leaving Ethan with another layer of uncertainty and complication. The diner was nearly empty when he arrived, and Sarah was already in a corner booth with 2 cups of coffee. "I know what Victoria's doing," she said as soon as Ethan sat down. "I know because she tried the same thing with me 2 years ago. I'm FBI, Ethan. I've been undercover at Morrison Industries investigating both Victoria Sterling and Thomas Harrison for financial crimes. They're both dirty, they're both dangerous, and you're caught in the middle of a war between 2 criminal operations." Ethan felt the ground disappear beneath him. "FBI," he repeated stupidly. Sarah nodded. And for the first time since he met her, her smile looked genuine. "Victoria Sterling didn't just embezzle from the company. She's part of a long-term pattern of corporate manipulation and fraud. Harrison is corrupt too, but he's small-time compared to what she's done. We've been building a case for 3 years, and we need witnesses. We need people who can testify about what both sides have asked them to do." Ethan wanted to walk out, wanted to drive home and pretend none of this was real. But Sarah kept talking. "Victoria has a history. Before Morrison Industries, there were 2 other companies where similar patterns emerged. Young executives, hired under strange circumstances, given access to sensitive information, then dying in accidents that were never quite explained properly. The FBI opened an investigation after the second death, but we've never had enough evidence to move forward. That's why I'm here, why I've spent 2 years working operations and waiting for her to make her next move." She pulled out a phone and showed Ethan photos. Men in their 30s and 40s, strangers with families, men who looked like they had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. "Victoria doesn't just manipulate companies, Ethan. She manipulates people. She finds someone with integrity, someone desperate, someone with a child or a sick parent or medical debt, and she turns them into tools. When they stop being useful or start becoming liabilities, they disappear. The coffee in Ethan's stomach turned to acid. Why didn't you warn me? Why did you let her hire me if you knew what she was? Sarah's expression was hard, professional. Because we need to catch her in the act. We need documented proof of recruitment, coercion, criminal conspiracy. We need witnesses, and unfortunately, that means putting people in danger. I'm sorry, but now you have a choice. You can help us build the case that will finally put Victoria Sterling in prison, or you can keep playing her game and hope you survive long enough to get out. Ethan went home that night and sat in Lily's doorway, watching her sleep and thinking about all the ways he had failed to protect her. He had taken a job that put them both in danger, had trusted a woman who turned kindness into weapons, had believed that doing the right thing would lead somewhere good instead of somewhere dark. The next morning, he met with Sarah again and agreed to work with the FBI, to wear a wire during meetings with Victoria, to document everything she asked him to do, to become the kind of bait that might finally trap a predator who had been hunting for years. She'll sense something's wrong, Ethan said, and Sarah nodded. Probably. Victoria is smart, careful, paranoid, but she's also arrogant. She thinks she's always the smartest person in the room, and that's her weakness. Just act scared, act conflicted. That's what she expects. Feed her what she wants to hear, and let us handle the rest. It sounded simple, but Ethan knew nothing about this situation was simple. Knew that every word he spoke from now on would be recorded and judged and potentially used to save or destroy lives. The meeting with Victoria 2 days later was in a parking garage. Her choice, her control over the environment. Ethan wore the wire the FBI had given him, a tiny device that felt enormous and obvious, even though Sarah assured him it was virtually undetectable. Victoria was waiting by her car, and she did not smile when Ethan approached. "You've been talking to people," she said, and Ethan's heart stopped. "Harrison approached you, and now you're hesitating. I understand caution, Ethan, but I need to know where your loyalty lies." He forced himself to breathe normally, to channel the genuine fear and confusion he felt into his performance. "I'm not built for this. The spying, the lying. I'm just trying to keep my job and take care of my daughter. I don't know who to trust anymore." Victoria studied him for a long moment, and Ethan wondered if she could somehow sense the wire, could hear the faint buzz of the recording device. Then she did something unexpected. She softened, let her controlled facade crack just enough to show something that might have been vulnerability. "My husband died 3 years ago," she said quietly. "Harrison killed him. Not directly, not in a way that could be proven, but he sabotaged the brakes on his car because my husband discovered what Harrison was doing. I couldn't prove it then, but I can prove it now, if you help me. This isn't about money or power, Ethan. This is about justice for someone I loved who tried to do the right thing and died for it." The story was perfect, tragic, personal, designed to appeal to Ethan's sense of fairness and his own loss. He thought about Sarah's warnings, about the men in the photographs who had believed Victoria's stories and ended up dead, and he made himself nod sympathetically. "What do you need from me?" Victoria handed him a thumb drive. "Install this on Harrison's computer. It will copy his entire hard drive. Emails, documents, everything. We'll finally have the proof we need to take him down legally." Ethan took the drive, knowing that Sarah and her FBI team were listening, knowing that this was exactly the kind of evidence they needed to prove conspiracy and attempted corporate espionage. "When?" he asked, and Victoria's smile returned, cold and satisfied. "Tomorrow night. Harrison works late every Thursday. Security is light. You'll have access." She touched his shoulder, a gesture that was meant to be reassuring, but felt like a brand. "You're doing the right thing, Ethan. When this is over, I'll make sure you and Lily are set for life. That's a promise." She drove away, and Ethan stood alone in the parking garage, wondering how many other people she had made that same promise to before they died. The FBI moved faster than Ethan expected. By the next morning, they had analyzed the thumb drive Victoria gave him and confirmed it contained sophisticated malware designed not just to copy data, but to plant incriminating evidence. Emails and financial records that would frame Harrison for crimes while hiding Victoria's involvement. "She was setting you up," Sarah explained in a secure room at the FBI field office. "If you'd installed that software, we would have found your fingerprints on Harrison's computer, your access logs in the system. When the evidence surfaced, you'd be the obvious suspect, a desperate single dad who infiltrated the company to steal money, got caught, and conveniently died in a car accident before he could testify." Classic Victoria Sterling playbook. The photographs of the other men suddenly made terrible sense. "So what now?" Ethan asked, and Sarah's expression was grim. "Now we see how far she'll go. We want you to tell her the installation went wrong, that you couldn't access Harrison's computer. See how she reacts, see if she reveals anything else. We're close, Ethan. Just a little longer." But Victoria's reaction was not what any of them expected. When Ethan called to report the failure, she was silent for a long time before saying, "That's unfortunate. I had hoped you would be more useful. Thomas Harrison knows you're working with me. Moi. Ethan, I made sure of it. Right now, he thinks you're my tool, my insider threat. If you're not going to actually help me, then you're just a liability who knows too much." The line went dead, and 15 minutes later, Ethan got a call from Morrison Industries HR, informing him that he was suspended pending an investigation into unauthorized access to confidential systems. The evidence they cited was real. All the times he had copied files for Victoria, all the systems he had accessed under her direction. He had documentation from the FBI, proof that he was working undercover, but Victoria had been careful to make it look like he was acting alone. Sarah assured him the FBI would clear everything up, would protect him. But Ethan heard the uncertainty in her voice and knew that legal protection did not mean physical safety. The threat became real 2 days later when Lily's school called to say that someone had tried to pick her up, claiming to be Ethan's assistant and saying there was a family emergency. The school had followed protocol, refused release, but the description of the woman matched Victoria Sterling. Ethan picked up his daughter, held her tight in the school parking lot, and made a decision that Sarah and the FBI were not going to like. "I'm done," he told Sarah that evening. "I'm taking Lily somewhere safe, and you can build your case without us. She threatened my daughter. I don't care about evidence or testimony or putting Victoria in prison. I care about keeping Lily alive." Sarah's response was sharp and immediate. "If you run, Victoria will see it as confirmation that you're a threat. She'll come after you harder, and we won't be able to protect you. The only way through this is to see it to the end, to help us arrest her in a way that sticks." But Ethan was past the point of trusting systems and authorities, past believing that doing the right thing led anywhere except deeper into danger. That night, Mike showed up at Ethan's apartment with packed bags and a plan. "You're staying with me for a few days, both of you. My place is secure, and no one knows about it except us." Ethan should have been grateful, should have recognized the gesture for the friendship it represented. But something about Mike's timing, about the way he kept glancing at his phone, triggered the paranoia that had been growing since the day he stopped on Highway 27. "How did you know I needed a place to stay?" Ethan asked carefully. "I didn't tell you about what happened at Lily's school." Mike's expression flickered, just for a second, and in that flicker, Ethan saw the truth. "She got to you," he said flatly. Victoria. How much did she pay you? Mike's shoulders sagged, and he could not meet Ethan's eyes. She said you were in trouble, said you needed help, but were too proud to ask. She gave me $5,000 to keep you safe, to make sure you and Lily had somewhere to go. I thought I was helping, man. I swear I thought I was helping. Ethan felt the last piece of his old life crumble. His best friend since high school, the person who had stood by him when his wife died, who had helped him pack up their old house and move into the cramped apartment, bought and paid for by the woman who was hunting him. Sarah called an hour after Mike left, shamefaced and apologetic. We're moving up the timeline. Tomorrow night, we're bringing Victoria in. We have enough for conspiracy charges, attempted fraud, and we're coordinating with local police on the attempted kidnapping at Lily's school. This ends tomorrow, Ethan. Just get through one more night. But one more night felt like an eternity, and Ethan spent it sitting by Lily's bed with a baseball bat across his lap, jumping at every sound in the hallway outside their apartment. Morning came gray and cold, and Ethan sent Lily to stay with a neighbor he trusted, an elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson, who had known them since they moved in, and who agreed without questions when Ethan said he had some business to handle. Keep her inside, he told Mrs. Patterson. Don't answer the door for anyone except me. I'll be back by tonight. The old woman nodded, understanding more than he said, and Lily hugged him tight before going inside. I love you, Dad, she whispered. And Ethan held her like he might never get another chance. The FBI plan was straightforward. Ethan would meet Victoria one more time, this time in a location the FBI controlled, and Sarah's team would move in when Victoria attempted to either threaten him or make another move toward violence. The meeting place was an abandoned warehouse in the industrial district, Victoria's choice, because she thought she was controlling the situation. Ethan arrived first, wearing the wire, watching the FBI agents take positions in the shadows. Victoria's car pulled up exactly on time, and she got out alone, walking toward him with that same calculated confidence. I'm disappointed in you, Ethan, she said without preamble. I gave you an opportunity, a way to do something meaningful, and you wasted it. Worse, you betrayed me. She pulled out her phone and showed him photographs, images of Ethan meeting with Sarah, entering the FBI field office, wearing the wire that was currently recording their conversation. Did you really think I wouldn't know? Did you think I've survived this long by trusting people? Ethan's heart was pounding so hard, he thought Victoria could probably hear it. What do you want? He asked, and Victoria's smile was arctic. I want you to understand what happens to people who get in my way. A car pulled up behind her, and Sarah Martinez got out. But not FBI agent Sarah Martinez. This Sarah was different, harder, and she walked to Victoria's side like they were a team. Surprise, Sarah said, and Ethan's world tilted sideways. I'm not FBI. I'm Victoria's sister, and you're not wearing a wire that connects to law enforcement. You're wearing a wire that we've been using to monitor exactly what the FBI knows about us. The FBI agents were moving now, closing in from their positions, but Victoria was faster. She pulled out a gun, small, elegant, deadly, and pointed it at Ethan. They can't shoot without risking you. We're going to walk to my car, and you're going to come with us quietly, or I'll make sure they find Lily's body before they find yours. But Victoria had made one critical error. She had underestimated David Foster. The VP of Operations, the man who had hired Ethan and welcomed him to Morrison Industries, stepped out from behind a concrete pillar with his own weapon drawn and an FBI badge around his neck. Drop the gun, Victoria. It's over. The standoff lasted seconds that felt like hours, and Ethan saw Victoria calculating odds, measuring distances, weighing outcomes. Sarah, the real Sarah, Victoria's sister, was backing toward the car, fear finally breaking through her controlled exterior. "She made me do it," Sarah said, voice cracking. "Our father, the men before Ethan. She made me help. Said it was the only way we'd be safe." Victoria's mask slipped, showing rage and contempt. "Shut up," she hissed at her sister, but Sarah kept talking, the words spilling out like confession. "You killed our father when I was 18, made me believe he was abusing us, made me help you push him down the stairs. Everything I've done since then has been because you convinced me we were in danger, that these men were threats. But they weren't. They were just tools for your games." David Foster moved closer, other agents converging, and Victoria lowered the gun. "You can't prove anything," she said, but her voice had lost its certainty. "The Wire," Foster replied, "has been recording everything both of you just said, including the confession about your father and admission of conspiracy and multiple deaths. Victoria Sterling, Sarah Martinez, you're under arrest." The takedown was quick and efficient, and Ethan stood shaking as they put handcuffs on the woman who had turned his simple act of kindness into a nightmare. Victoria looked at him one last time before they led her away. "You were good," she said, almost admiringly. "Better than the others. I almost felt bad about what I was going to do to you. Almost." Then she was gone, pushed into the back of a federal vehicle. And Ethan collapsed against the warehouse wall, unable to process what had just happened. David Foster approached, holstered his weapon, and sat down next to Ethan on the concrete. "We've been investigating Victoria Sterling for 4 years, he said quietly. 3 men dead before you, all in situations that looked like accidents but never quite added up. She's a psychopath, Ethan, a true one, rare and dangerous. She identifies people with strong moral codes, manufactures situations where they reveal their character, then exploits that character until they become liabilities. The car breakdown on Highway 27 was staged. She researched you for 6 months before that morning, your financial situation, your daughter, your wife's death, your tendency to help people even at personal cost. Everything about that encounter was designed to test whether you'd stop, whether you'd sacrifice something important to help a stranger. You passed her test, which made you perfect for her purposes." Ethan wanted to be sick. "The other men," he said, "the ones who died, did they have kids?" Foster's silence was answer enough. "She uses children as leverage, threatens them, or actually hurts them if the target doesn't comply. We couldn't prove it before, but this time we have recordings, testimony from Sarah, and physical evidence connecting Victoria to at least 2 of the previous deaths. She's going to prison for the rest of her life." The aftermath took weeks to resolve. Morrison Industries offered Ethan a settlement, a year's salary and medical coverage in exchange for signing a non-disclosure agreement about the investigation. Thomas Harrison, it turned out, had been legitimately corrupt, but had nothing to do with Victoria's schemes, just a convenient villain she could point to while running her own operations. Harrison was arrested separately for embezzlement, and the company began the long process of rebuilding under new leadership. Ethan took the settlement money and quit, unable to imagine going back to a place that represented so much manipulation and fear. Mike apologized a dozen times, returned Victoria's money to the FBI as evidence, and accepted that their friendship might never fully recover. "I'm sorry," was all he could say, and Ethan nodded because he understood how Victoria worked, how she found weaknesses and exploited them. Mike's weakness had been wanting to help, just like Ethan's had been. Lily took it harder than Ethan expected. She had nightmares about the woman who tried to take her from school, about bad people who hurt dads who helped strangers. The therapist they started seeing said it would take time, that trauma did not have a timeline, that the most important thing was creating safety and stability in their daily life. Ethan threw himself into that work, establishing routines, finding a new job at a smaller company where nobody knew his story, making their apartment feel like home instead of a temporary shelter from disaster. Slowly, carefully, they built something that felt like recovery. Lily joined a drama club at school and started processing her fear through performance. Ethan started dating again, cautiously, with a woman named Patricia who owned a coffee shop and whose greatest drama was choosing which pastries to feature each morning. Life became smaller, quieter, and Ethan learned to see that as a blessing rather than a limitation. 6 months after Victoria's arrest, Ethan received a letter forwarded through his lawyer. The return address was the federal correctional facility where Victoria was awaiting trial. He almost threw it away unread, but something made him open it. The handwriting was elegant, controlled. Ethan, I've had a lot of time to think about what went wrong. They tell me I'm a sociopath, that I lack the capacity for genuine emotional connection. Perhaps they're right, but I want you to know that our interaction on Highway 27 was as real as anything in my life has been. I did need help that day, not with my car, but with understanding whether goodness actually exists, or if it's just another mask people wear until circumstances change. You proved it exists. That's worth something, even if everything that came after was darkness. I'm sorry for what I put you and your daughter through. I won't insult you by claiming I didn't know what I was doing. I knew. I did it anyway. But I hope you can believe that in that first moment, when you pulled over to help a stranger, something genuine happened. It just wasn't enough to change what I am. Ethan burned the letter in his kitchen sink and never mentioned it to anyone. But the words stayed with him, tangled and complicated. He thought about that morning often, the moment when he saw the broken-down Mercedes and made the choice to stop. Knowing what he knew now, would he make the same choice? The question kept him awake sometimes, wrestling with the implications. If he had driven past Victoria, some other good person would have stopped eventually, would have become her target instead. Or maybe she would have been caught sooner, her pattern disrupted before she could hurt more people. Or maybe nothing would have changed, except that Ethan and Lily would have avoided months of fear and trauma. The answer, when it finally came, surprised him with its simplicity. He would stop again. Not because the outcome had been good, it had been terrible, but because the alternative was becoming someone who looked at suffering and chose convenience, who calculated risk before compassion, who let fear win. Victoria had tried to teach him that kindness was weakness, that helping strangers led to exploitation and danger. But she had been wrong about one crucial thing. Being hurt did not mean being destroyed. And surviving darkness did not require surrendering light. A year after everything ended, Ethan was driving Lily to school when they passed Highway 27. A car was pulled over with its hazard lights flashing, hood up, smoke drifting from the engine. Ethan felt his heart rate spike, felt the old fear surge through his system. Lily noticed. "Someone needs help," she said quietly, and Ethan heard the question underneath her words. He pulled over, but this time he was careful. Called roadside assistance first, kept distance between himself and the stranded driver, made sure Lily stayed in the car with doors locked. The driver was a young man, genuinely distressed, grateful for the help. It took 15 minutes, and Ethan was not late for anything important. When he got back in the car, Lily smiled. "You still help people," she said. and the pride in her voice made something tight in Ethan's chest finally loosen. "I do," he agreed, "but I help smarter now." She nodded, understanding more than he gave her credit for, and they drove on toward their ordinary day, in their ordinary life that felt extraordinary because they had survived something designed to break them and had come out intact. The trial happened without Ethan's testimony. Victoria pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty, accepting life without parole in exchange for detailed confessions that closed investigations into 7 deaths over 15 years. Sarah received a lighter sentence in exchange for cooperation, would be eligible for parole in 12 years, would spend that time in psychiatric treatment trying to understand how completely her sister had controlled her reality. Thomas Harrison got 10 years for embezzlement and fraud. Morrison Industries settled civil suits from the families of Victoria's previous victims and implemented new oversight policies that probably would not prevent the next intelligent predator, but made everyone feel like they were trying. The world moved on, because that is what the world does, and Ethan moved with it, carrying his scars privately and learning to live with the knowledge that kindness and danger could exist in the same space, that helping people was still worth the risk, even when the risk was real. On quiet nights, when Lily was asleep and the apartment was still, Ethan sometimes thought about Victoria's letter and her claim that their Highway 27 encounter had been genuine. He did not believe it was true, could not believe it, because accepting that even a fraction of her manipulation had been real would mean granting her power over his memory of that morning. But he understood what she had been reaching for in her twisted way. She had been looking for evidence that goodness existed, that people could choose sacrifice over self-interest without calculation. She had found that evidence in Ethan, and because she was what she was, she had tried to destroy it. But she had failed. Ethan was still here, still helping when he could, still teaching Lily that integrity mattered even when it cost something. Victoria Sterling had tested him and found him good, and then had spent months trying to prove that goodness was just another vulnerability to exploit. In the end, she had proved the opposite, that goodness could survive exposure to evil, could bend without breaking, could choose to remain good even after learning how dangerous that choice could be. It was a small victory, personal and private, but it was enough.